They laughed at him, mocked him, even assumed he couldn't possibly build what was in front of them. But what happened next stunned everyone. This is the story of a teen who turned prejudice into proof of genius. In a quiet suburban street, a police officer mocked a black teen driver. He laughed. He doubted. He assumed. But what the officer didn't know, this teen wasn't just driving a car. He had built it. And what happened next would shock the town, redefine expectations, and teach a lesson in brilliance and justice. The night air hung heavy over the quiet suburban streets, thick with the scent of rain-soaked asphalt and the faint hum of streetlights flickering in sync with distant traffic. Marcus Reed gripped the steering wheel of his hand-built electric car, the dashboard glowing softly in cool blue light, the hum of the engine a quiet testament to his genius. Every curve of the chassis, every wire and circuit, had been his labor, crafted late nights in his tiny bedroom-turned lab, where college textbooks and electronics kits lay scattered like confetti after a storm. The city slept unaware that a 17-year-old had just redefined what a vehicle could be, efficient, sleek, and utterly silent. But Marcus didn't care. He drove not for recognition, but for the freedom of proving himself in a world that constantly underestimated him. And yet, freedom was fragile. As he eased through the intersection, headlights suddenly blazed from behind, red and blue flashing like the eyes of judgment itself. The car shuddered slightly under his hands as he instinctively pulled over. Officer Daniels, a man in his mid-40s with a square jaw and a permanent scowl, approached with that deliberate arrogance that made Marcus's stomach tighten. "License and registration," Daniels barked, his voice carrying more contempt than authority. Marcus's pulse quickened, a familiar tightness curling in his chest, the tension of every encounter where skin color weighed more than skill or merit. Yes, sir," Marcus replied, fumbling for the papers. His voice steady despite the weight of years of microaggressions and dismissals compacted into this single moment. He handed over the documents, feeling the officer's eyes linger not on the sleek design of the car, not on the precision of its engineering, but on him, the teenage black driver in an unconventional vehicle. Daniels crouched slightly, examining the car's chassis, his brow furrowed. "Where'd you get this thing? Street shop? Some kind of kit car?" The words dripped with skepticism, even amusement. Marcus swallowed, suppressing the irritation that bubbled like magma. "I built it myself, sir. Every part, every wire, every calculation." Daniels laughed then, a short, sharp burst that echoed down the empty street. "Yeah, right. You? A kid? You built this?" He shook his head, glancing at the patrol car as if to invite backup for a scene he imagined would amuse his colleagues. "Let's see it then." Pop the hood, genius. Marcus hesitated. Pride and caution warred within him. This was his life's work on display, and yet the mocking in Daniel's eyes was palpable, an almost physical weight pressing against his chest. With a deep breath, he complied, lifting the sleek panel to reveal a network of circuits, lithium batteries, and custom-engineered components arranged with precision that would make any engineer nod in approval. Daniel squinted, leaning closer, his expression shifting in the faintest way, curiosity flickering behind the mask of arrogance. "Well, interesting," he muttered, though the tone still carried a patronizing edge. "Do you even know how to drive something like this safely?" Marcus blinked, incredulous. "I designed it for efficiency, stability, and safety. It handles better than most cars on the road." Daniels laughed again, more derisively this time, stepping back. "Kid, I've pulled over a lot of wannabe tech nerds. You're lucky if this thing doesn't blow a fuse and fry your brain." Every word was an insult, a dismissal, a microcosm of the bias Marcus had faced his entire life. Not for what he could do, but for the color of his skin and the age on his driver's license. He could feel anger simmering beneath his calm exterior, the familiar burn of injustice. But he also felt something else, resolve. Daniels thought this was his stage, that mocking a black teenager in a homemade car would be entertaining, maybe even validating his sense of superiority. But Marcus knew patience was a weapon just as sharp as intellect. And tonight, intellect would speak louder than prejudice. The tension stretched, thick as fog. Other drivers slowed past, curious about the flashing lights and the sleek, unconventional car, but none dared approach. Marcus noticed one woman recording from her front porch, her phone angled toward the scene, the faint glow illuminating concern etched on her face. A young couple whispered from a minivan, startled at the apparent confrontation. All around, eyes were on him, yet no one intervened, leaving him suspended in this crucible of bias and expectation. Daniel circled the car, tapping panels, glancing at screens and wires, muttering technical terms he didn't understand. Marcus explained quietly, pointing to circuits and nodes, outlining voltage distribution, battery management systems, regenerative braking algorithms. The officer nodded occasionally, but never without that edge of derision. "So, you read a lot of books, huh? Bet you think that makes you smart." Marcus bit back the retort, measuring every word. The streets were quiet again, except for the soft hum of his car, the rhythm of his controlled breathing, and the occasional rustle of leaves in the night wind. And then the twist came. Daniels reached for the ignition. Not his car, of course, he couldn't, but with a casual flick, he pressed a button he didn't realize was Marcus's custom override. Lights on the dashboard blinked, then glowed brighter. The car's software ran a diagnostic, and suddenly, Daniels' radio crackled with static before playing a pre-recorded voice module. Unauthorized interference detected. All systems secured. The patrol car's engine sputtered. Its lights dimmed. Daniels froze, confusion and panic flashing across his face. What did you do?" Marcus leaned back, calm as a still lake, eyes sharp. "It's not a toy, sir. Every system has fail-safes. I don't just build cars, I engineer security, stability, and control. That's why this vehicle is mine, and that car out there, well, it's just standard." Daniels' face flushed a deep red, embarrassment and fear mingling in a way that silenced the mocking entirely. Bystanders gasped, some filming, some whispering, as the officer realized he'd underestimated the teenager before him. Marcus's intellect, patience, and foresight flipped the power dynamic in a heartbeat. The humiliation was instant. Daniels waved his hand dismissively, trying to save face, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Marcus shut the hood, voice calm but assertive. "It's not about proving you wrong, sir. It's about recognizing that what someone can do isn't determined by how they look or how old they are or what you expect." The words cut through the night, and for the first time, Daniels had nothing to counter, only the stark reality of his own arrogance laid bare. Bystanders murmured approval, whispers growing into nods, murmurs growing into applause, some even stepping closer to Marcus's car, inspecting with admiration, asking questions, taking notes. Marcus answered them all, patient, articulate, and composed, demonstrating dignity that transcended the petty mockery he had endured. His eyes scanned the small crowd, meeting those who had doubted him with quiet pride, a subtle smile acknowledging that intellect and perseverance had finally earned the respect that prejudice had withheld. Daniels retreated to his patrol car, flustered, muttering excuses to himself. The badge could not shield him from exposure. The community had seen the truth. Marcus started his car again, the hum gentle and controlled, and drove away slowly, leaving behind an unspoken lesson. Never underestimate the quiet genius. Never assume authority equates to understanding. And never dismiss someone based on who they are instead of what they can achieve. That night, Marcus didn't just drive home. He drove through the streets of possibility, each turn a metaphor, each light a reminder that the world could shift when patience, intelligence, and moral clarity meet prejudice head-on. In the glow of streetlights and the soft echo of applause fading behind him, Marcus knew the justice wasn't about punishment. It was about recognition, dignity, and the quiet, unshakable empowerment of being seen for exactly who he was. And the moral? It was simple, universal, and necessary. Never let assumptions dictate judgment. Never let arrogance blind perception. And always recognize the potential for greatness where it is least expected. Injustice can be confronted not just with confrontation, but with mastery, patience, and undeniable evidence of one's worth. The night ended not with anger, but with a community awakened, a young man empowered, and a lesson imprinted on every witness who had learned, even briefly, the profound impact of respect and recognition. By morning, the story had already begun to ripple through the neighborhood like a shockwave in water. Word of mouth travels fast, but the internet accelerates it exponentially. Phones lit up with videos of Marcus's car, of Daniel's frozen mid-gesture, of the sheer brilliance on display. Social media feeds were ablaze with disbelief and admiration. Teen builds car better than any engineer. One headline read, "Black genius turns officer's mockery into lesson in humility," another proclaimed. But Marcus didn't log on. Not yet. Recognition was secondary. Mastery, validation of his work, and quiet dignity mattered more. Still, the whispers followed him as he walked into school that Monday morning. Hallways that had once seemed suffocating with judgment and casual dismissiveness now carried a different weight. Classmates stopped mid-step, exchanging glances, some nodding quietly, some whispering, some daring to approach with questions. The same teachers who had overlooked him, labeling him quiet, distracted, or a dreamer, now had to reconcile their underestimation with reality. Marcus felt the strange duality of this attention, pride and discomfort tangled in one tight knot. He wanted to be recognized, but he didn't want it to feel like spectacle. At lunch, his friends clustered around, their eyes wide, phones in hand, replaying snippets of the video. "Marcus, that was insane. Did you see his face?" one exclaimed, still laughing at the memory of Daniel's, fumbling under the weight of his own ego. Marcus chuckled softly, a rare and measured sound, sipping water, feeling the warmth of camaraderie, but holding a guarded center. "Yeah, I just wanted him to understand," he said. "Understand, not humiliate." That was the key. His smile held authority without arrogance, a skill learned from years of navigating spaces that doubted him at every turn. Meanwhile, Danielle's phone was ringing off the hook, and the precinct was buzzing. Supervisors wanted statements, explanations, damage control. The footage had gone viral, and Daniels, once confident in the protective bubble of his uniform and authority, was now under scrutiny he hadn't anticipated. Embarrassment gnawed at him like a persistent storm, and for once, there was no clever quip, no shifting of blame. The spotlight had shifted, and he could only squirm. Across town, engineers and inventors who had been following technological forums began dissecting the video. "Look at that chassis layout," one posted. "Custom regenerative system. Lithium cells arranged optimally for weight distribution, and the software." Another commented, "That kid's not just a driver. He's a full-scale engineer." "How old is he? 17? Are you kidding me?" Marcus had never imagined attention on this scale, technical admiration from strangers online, but he didn't let it inflate his ego. Instead, he read each comment, each technical breakdown, quietly learning and absorbing perspectives that might improve his next design. The tension that had begun as an individual confrontation had morphed into a community-wide reckoning. Neighbors and strangers alike began asking themselves uncomfortable questions. How often had they dismissed someone too quickly? How many young black students with brilliance had been quietly ignored, left to navigate a world that expected less from them? The incident had ignited reflection, a slow-burning awareness that justice isn't always about punishment. It's about visibility, acknowledgement, and the courage to confront bias with skill and integrity. At school, Principal Harris called Marcus into her office. A tall, composed woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, she had always recognized Marcus's potential, even when others had overlooked it. "Marcus," she said, her voice a mixture of pride and concern, "I've seen what happened. I want to make sure you know what you did was extraordinary. But there's more at stake than just your recognition. This could inspire others, but it could also bring unwanted attention." Marcus nodded, understanding the delicate balance. Recognition could empower, yes, but it could also expose vulnerability. "I'm ready," he said. "I want to show people what's possible." That afternoon, he met with a local technology club that had heard about his car. Teens and mentors alike crowded around him, asking questions, taking notes, and marveling at the engineering. Marcus guided them patiently, breaking down complex systems into digestible insights. He explained voltage control, battery management, aerodynamics, and software integration, all without condescension, demonstrating a rare combination of technical mastery and emotional intelligence. For the first time, he felt the exhilaration of influence, not as a demonstration of superiority, but as a bridge to inspire others who, like him, had faced doubt and dismissal. Meanwhile, Danielle's career and reputation were quietly fraying. Internal Affairs reviewed the incident, questions were asked, and his colleagues' smiles were no longer ironic, but tinged with caution. He had miscalculated, mistaking arrogance and authority for actual competence. The universe, in its quiet, poetic justice, had reminded him that intelligence, dignity, and patience could outweigh rank and aggression in a heartbeat. But the twist that truly flipped the dynamic came during a community showcase organized to highlight local youth talent. Marcus's car was the centerpiece, a shining example of innovation and persistence. Local officials, educators, and parents gathered, including some who had once dismissed him, including Daniels, who had been quietly invited under the guise of observation and accountability. When Marcus activated the car's autonomous demonstration mode, it flawlessly navigated a complex obstacle course he had designed, responding to changes in terrain, light, and simulated traffic patterns. Applause erupted, the sound of recognition and admiration wrapping around him like sunlight breaking through a storm. Daniels watched, stunned. He could not deny what he saw. Every misjudgment, every dismissive glance he had cast toward Marcus, now reflected back as a lesson in humility. He stepped forward awkwardly, words faltering, and offered a hand, not in condescension, but in reluctant acknowledgement. Marcus, that was impressive. Truly, I underestimated you. Marcus shook his hand, firm and measured, the gesture bridging the gap between authority and achievement, turning a moment that had begun in mockery into one of respect and reconciliation. The crowd erupted again, but Marcus's attention was on the teens watching him, some of whom had never imagined they could achieve something similar. He spoke softly but with clarity. It's not about proving someone wrong. It's about proving to yourself that you can do the impossible when no one believes in you. Don't wait for permission. Build, create, and push forward. And never let someone else's bias define your potential. The words hung in the auditorium like an anthem, a call to action. Parents nodded. Students whispered promises to themselves. And even Daniels felt the weight of a lesson settling into his bones. By evening, Marcus returned home, exhausted but fulfilled. The car, now polished and gleaming, sat quietly in the driveway, a testament to what dedication, intelligence, and resilience could achieve. He reflected on the dual resolutions of the day. Immediate poetic justice had humbled the officer, and longer-term emotional closure had empowered him and inspired a community. Recognition was not vanity. It was a vehicle for change. As the night deepened, Marcus climbed into his room-turned lab, tinkering once again. Every wire, every circuit, every algorithm was a meditation on potential, perseverance, and the quiet revolution of intellect. Outside, the street was calm. The hum of the city, a gentle reminder that moments of injustice can be transformed into catalysts for growth, visibility, and respect. The moral reverberated. Confront bias not just with words, but with excellence, patience, and integrity. Change begins when individuals refuse to let prejudice dictate outcomes, and when communities choose to recognize merit wherever it resides. And so, the young engineer slept that night not as a boy who had been mocked, but as a man whose brilliance had spoken louder than prejudice, whose dignity had commanded respect, and whose actions had sparked a ripple of possibility across every witness, observer, and inspired mind. The lesson was clear, cinematic in its simplicity. When intellect meets courage, injustice bends, recognition follows, and the world takes note. The days that followed blurred into a cascade of recognition, inquiry, and subtle transformation. Marcus found himself navigating a new reality. One where curiosity replaced mockery, where admiration began to overshadow doubt, and where opportunities opened doors he hadn't dared knock on before. Invitations arrived, local science fairs, technology expos, even informal mentorship offers from engineers who had once dismissed teenagers as too inexperienced. Each encounter reminded him that the injustice he had endured, the sneers, the assumptions, the casual dismissal of his intellect, had not defined him. It had merely fueled a drive that now bore fruit far beyond the confines of his small bedroom lab. Yet, despite the growing spotlight, Marcus remained grounded. He continued his high school classes with the same focus, quietly acing exams, quietly building new prototypes, quietly observing the world as though every interaction were a lesson in human behavior as much as it was in engineering. But the confrontation with Officer Daniels lingered, a reminder of how authority can sometimes wield bias like a weapon. Daniels, for his part, had not disappeared from Marcus's life. Internal reviews and community pressure forced him into a quieter, humbler posture. He avoided public commentary, limited his interactions with Marcus, and even participated in an officer training seminar focused on implicit bias, a measure of accountability he hadn't expected but quietly respected. In the local news cycle, the story took on a life of its own. Marcus's ingenuity became a beacon, not just for technological achievement, but for racial justice and the dismantling of assumptions. Schools discussed the incident in ethics and STEM classes. Community centers held workshops where teens could explore electronics, coding, and mechanics. Parents, teachers, and local leaders openly acknowledged their own blind spots. Marcus's example became a catalyst, demonstrating that empowerment is not granted. It is earned, cultivated, and shown through resilience and skill. One afternoon, a reporter asked Marcus what it felt like to have the world finally paying attention. He considered the question carefully, measuring his response not for sound bites, but for truth. "I didn't build this car to prove anyone wrong," he said, voice steady and deliberate. "I built it to prove to myself that I could." The recognition is wonderful, but the real lesson is that potential exists everywhere, especially in places people often overlook. If my work inspires even one other kid who's doubted, discouraged, or underestimated, then it's already done more than I could ever imagine. The words resonated, echoing in minds far beyond the walls of that interview room. Daniels, watching from the corner of the seminar, felt a pang he hadn't anticipated. Regret mixed with newfound respect. He had spent years relying on authority and experience to assert control, believing that knowledge was his by default. Marcus, with intellect, patience, and composure, had shattered that illusion. And while the officer's career remained intact, the encounter had imprinted an indelible lesson. Humility, acknowledgement, and the courage to confront bias are forces more potent than rank or intimidation. The ultimate twist came not through confrontation, but through collaboration. Marcus partnered with local inventors and educators to design community programs for youth innovation. He transformed the hand-built car into a teaching tool, demonstrating physics, engineering, and critical thinking through interactive sessions. Teens who had once doubted themselves now approached him with eagerness, tinkering alongside him under his guidance. And when asked to present at a regional technology symposium, Marcus did so not as a spectacle, but as a mentor, quietly demonstrating that genius is most transformative when shared, not flaunted. Through all this, Marcus never forgot the injustice that had sparked the journey. The officer who had mocked him was now part of the learning narrative, a cautionary example of how assumptions and bias can blind even those tasked with protection. Yet Marcus extended no vengeance, only recognition of the lesson learned. Daniels, once an antagonist, became a symbol of accountability, quietly participating in workshops about implicit bias, safety, and community engagement. Poetic justice had manifested not as punishment, but as transformation. The arrogance humbled, the brilliance celebrated, and the community enriched. The dual resolution was complete. Immediate poetic justice in the form of Daniels's public humility and internal reckoning, and long-term emotional closure and empowerment for Marcus, whose dignity, patience, and brilliance were finally acknowledged by both peers and authority figures alike. The young engineer had not only defended himself, but had elevated everyone around him, turning a moment of mockery into a movement of inspiration and recognition. By the time the evening streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across quiet sidewalks, Marcus returned to his driveway. The car sat polished, gleaming, and silent, a monument to countless hours of labor, learning, and resilience. He reflected on the journey from being underestimated, mocked, and judged to becoming a symbol of intellect, integrity, and empowerment. The night was quiet, but the impact resonated far beyond what the eye could see. His community had witnessed a transformation, the power of patience over prejudice, and the undeniable authority of skill tempered with humility. The final moral echoed with clarity. Justice isn't always loud, and recognition isn't always immediate. True power lies in demonstrating excellence with dignity, confronting bias with skill, and inspiring change through action rather than anger. When courage, intellect, and moral clarity intersect, the world cannot help but respond. In every dismissive glance, every skeptical question, every whisper of doubt, there is potential, not just for personal triumph, but for societal awakening. Marcus closed his eyes that night, not dreaming of fame, but of possibility. He had built a car, yes, but more importantly, he had built a bridge between skepticism and acknowledgement, between bias and understanding, between potential and opportunity. And as he slept, a subtle smile traced his lips, knowing that the lessons of resilience, intellect, and integrity were now alive in the hearts of those who had witnessed them. The night had ended not with defeat, but with empowerment, not with humiliation, but with hope and the quiet certainty that the world had, in its own way, finally learned to see him. Weeks passed, yet the impact of that night lingered like the faint hum of an engine winding down after a long drive. Marcus noticed it everywhere, in classrooms, in community centers, on social media feeds, in the casual nods of neighbors who had once overlooked him. Every encounter reminded him that change often begins quietly, with one act of integrity, patience, and brilliance. But the ripple effects were more profound than recognition. They were reshaping the narrative of possibility itself. Local media outlets returned to cover Marcus's journey, this time focusing not on the confrontation, but on the lessons and inspiration it had sparked. One reporter asked him, "Marcus, do you ever get tired of explaining yourself?" He smiled, thoughtful. "Not anymore," he replied. "I don't explain to prove something to someone who doubts me. I share because someone else might need to see that what seems impossible is, in fact, possible." The words, simple but deliberate, carried a weight far beyond the camera lens. They spoke to every young person who had been underestimated, dismissed, or silenced, a reminder that intellect and perseverance are unassailable when paired with patience and dignity. At school, Marcus's peers began approaching him differently, not with envy, not with mockery, but with curiosity and respect. Some asked for help with STEM projects, some for mentorship, and some simply to understand the quiet confidence he carried. Teachers, too, adjusted their approach, recognizing that brilliance can be found in the least expected places, and that potential is not always visible at first glance. The incident with Officer Daniels had become a case study, a living example of bias confronted and humility earned. Community centers invited Marcus to host workshops, guiding teens through hands-on engineering projects. He taught not just technical skills, but problem-solving, resilience, and the quiet art of patience. He encouraged students to embrace failure as a learning tool, to challenge assumptions, and to understand that mastery comes not from seeking approval, but from the relentless pursuit of knowledge and integrity. Each session was more than instruction. It was a subtle revolution, a reshaping of expectations, a reminder that capability is often hidden beneath layers of doubt and stereotype. Daniels, for his part, remained a reluctant participant in the new reality. He attended some of these workshops, initially skeptical, uncertain of how to navigate the shift in dynamic. But even he could not ignore the transformation. The young man he had mocked now stood as a teacher, a mentor, a figure of respect and influence. Through observation and eventually engagement, Daniels began to see the value of acknowledgement, accountability, and the power of example. The poetic justice of the earlier encounter was now reinforced by ongoing impact. Arrogance humbled, intellect celebrated, community enriched. Marcus's story also reached local policymakers and educational boards, who began advocating for programs to identify and nurture youth talent in STEM, particularly among underrepresented communities. The ripple effect of one teenager's resilience and brilliance extended far beyond a single street or neighborhood. It became a blueprint for social change. Marcus understood the weight of this responsibility, but he approached it with the same quiet confidence that had guided him through the confrontation. Methodical, humble, and resolute. Late one night, Marcus sat in his lab, revisiting the car that had sparked it all. The lithium batteries glowed faintly, circuits humming softly, as if in quiet acknowledgement of the work done, of the journey traveled. He reflected on the layers of the experience, the fear and tension of that night with Daniels, the exhilaration of vindication, the responsibility of recognition, and the ongoing commitment to inspire and teach. Each memory reinforced the lesson he had learned long before recognition came. Dignity, patience, and integrity are the cornerstones of lasting change. And yet, Marcus's journey wasn't about personal glory. He invited peers into his workspace, showing them how to solder, how to optimize circuits, how to think critically about design and function. He encouraged them to ask questions, to experiment, to fail and try again. In doing so, he created an environment where knowledge was accessible, where curiosity was celebrated, and where every student could glimpse the possibility of mastery, regardless of background or circumstance. The dual resolution solidified over months. Immediate poetic justice had humbled Daniels in a moment of confrontation. Extended emotional closure had empowered Marcus and inspired an entire community. But the longer-term effect, the true measure of the story, was in the systemic awakening that began to take root. Parents spoke differently to their children, teachers assessed potential more carefully, and peers approached brilliance with curiosity instead of judgment. The young engineer had not only defended his own dignity, but had amplified the potential of everyone around him. In a culminating showcase organized by the community center, Marcus unveiled an improved version of the electric vehicle, complete with interactive demonstrations that allowed attendees to explore energy efficiency, software integration, and safety mechanisms firsthand. Daniels attended again, this time quietly, observing the young man who had once been his target. When Marcus explained the vehicle's regenerative braking system, the real-time simulation of energy recapture, and the safety protocols he had embedded, even Daniels couldn't hide his astonishment. The audience erupted in applause, a collective recognition not just of Marcus's technical skill, but of the transformation it represented, a triumph over prejudice, a celebration of intellect, a testament to patience and perseverance. And in that moment, Marcus understood the full weight of his journey. Justice, empowerment, and inspiration could coexist, creating a narrative that transcended a single confrontation and reshaped a community's perception of potential and merit. As the day drew to a close, Marcus returned home, the soft hum of his creation echoing faintly in the driveway. He gazed at the stars, thinking of the countless young people who might now believe in themselves because of what he had done, and the countless adults who might now reconsider assumptions and biases they had taken for granted. The lesson was unmistakable. True impact is measured not in accolades, but in the lives touched, the minds inspired, and the prejudices dismantled. And so Marcus slept, not as a teenager who had been mocked and underestimated, but as a young man whose brilliance, patience, and moral clarity had reshaped his world. His car rested in the driveway, a quiet monument to diligence, innovation, and the indomitable spirit of perseverance. The night was calm, yet alive with possibility. The moral of the story resounded clearly universally. Confront bias not with anger, but with excellence. Uplift not for recognition, but for inspiration. And never let assumptions define potential. The world had witnessed the proof. Intellect, dignity, and integrity can bend prejudice, ignite change, and spark a legacy that endures far beyond a single confrontation. Marcus Reed's story proves one thing: never underestimate talent, patience, or integrity. What begins as mockery can become a movement, and a single act of brilliance can inspire an entire community. Share this story, uplift those who are underestimated, and remember, the world sees greatness when it refuses to look away.